Hi, welcome to Color Temperature in Pastel. I start off by using a photo reference like this, and I grid it with the rule of thirds crosshairs, and then diagonals through those that will help me to put the same format on my paper and to be able to sketch the two cute little lambs in proportion to each other. So, if drawing isn't your first language, this is a real helpful way to be able to draw from a reference photo onto a composition and make sure you're creating an interesting composition. In retrospect, I probably would have separated the lambs a little more so there was some space between them. But sometimes you can make all your mistakes up front with sketches, sometimes not. I do always start with some preliminary sketches like this value sketch, which helps me to see the different values of light that are on the lambs and then to translate those into color. The color study helps me to lay out the palette that I'm going to be using in pastel. There's a lot of warm reflected light on the bottom of the lambs, and I'm going to be using some different warms and cools. Here you can see the whole palette. Only a handful of pastels, but until I do that value sketch, I'm not sure which. I'm starting off with this beautiful chartreuse and negative space painting all of the grass in around the lambs. Now, this is important because it really helps to show the form of the lambs. I also am overlapping some of the fluffiness of the fur with the back on top of the grasses. So I want to make sure I have a color down for the grasses before I put the color of the fur on top. So I often paint from the back forward depending. So the background is very flat, so I'm going to break it up by putting other values of green in place. So this is a darker, warmer version of chartreuse. And this helps to break up some of the shapes. This is a cooler version, which helps to push back the background. I'm blending it lightly with my finger so that it looks like it's more distant. And I'm leaving some of the foreground rough to create the illusion of depth. Then I'm coming in with a warmer and lighter version of the same color. This is yellow, yellow-green. And I'm creating some texture in the grass. So this helps to create that illusion of depth that I'm looking for behind the two cute little lambs. The yellow is a warmer color and it helps to make the warm colors come forward and the cool colors recede. So you can see the background now has some texture and dimension to it. I'm putting a few grass stalks. This just furthers the texture. Now I'm starting to color match. I always print out my reference photos so that I can color match directly on the photo. The pink of their ears is the warmest and brightest color. It's also an opportunity to put a complement. So that pink is the complement of the green in the background and really pops. I'm going to include it in a few places on the lambs. So that way it isn't just in one place, it becomes an eye magnet. You want to include colors all over. I'm also putting a darker violet. This is purple, but it's a grayed out purple, so you can see it doesn't have a whole lot of intensity, and it's a good underpainting for the shadow parts of the lambs. It'll help give some dimension to their bodies. You can see in the reference photo that there's a lot of purple, or actually it's grayish in the reference photo. But as an artist, I look at it in terms of, is it warmer or cooler? So the shadow parts that are facing away from the sun are cooler. So that's why I'm using a blue violet. That's a cooler color. And you can see that it already creates dimension in the body of the lamb. So I put a little bit of that color on every plane of the lamb that's facing away from the sun. So this way you get a real sense of the form and the shape. I could use gray, but I'm an artist and I don't want to perfectly reproduce a photo. That's easy to do. Instead, I want to interpret the photo and to give you my idea of what's most important of it. Here I'm layering that same blue violet directly on top of some of the other color. You can still see a little bit of that warm color poking through the fur. I'm testing a little light blue, so this is a lighter version of the same blue violet, and I really like the way it looks. It helps to create dimension on the fur. So I'm going directly on top of the darker color with the lighter color to add some texture and to show some contours to the lamb's body. This is also a transition color between the dark shadow and the light when I put it in. So this is a lighter version, same color, a little bit bluer. And already it's starting to give some dimension to the fur. You can see the different planes of the lamb's body by the different values of blue violet. So the plane of the heads are facing the same direction on both, so they are both in the same color. The shoulders, the necks. And you can see the darker parts where the darker skin tone underneath the fur shows through. Now you start to get a feel for the form of the bodies and which parts are turned away from the sunlight. So you have a good sense of cool. This is one step lighter. So I have 3 values in the fur, and for this one step lighter, this is to be right next to the warmest area. So this is to further that transition and to further create a little bit of texture and fluffiness on their fur. So this color is going to be right up against the warm color of the sunlight. With those 3 values, you already see 3-dimensionally that fur. I vary my strokes too, so that I'm using just the edge of the pastel to create smaller marks. The smaller marks help to create texture. I'm following the nap of the fur and looking at the photograph off camera as I work, and I'm studying the nap of the fur as I go. This really helps me to capture it with my strokes. You always want your strokes, whether you're using paint or pastel, to follow the nap when you're doing an animal or a pet portrait. Now, very little blending needs to be done, but occasionally you want to touch it. The next 2 pastels are hard pastels. This is a dark brown. I put the ruler to act as a mole stick so that I don't disturb the pastel underneath. And I'm doing the fine details of the eyes and the darkest darks. I waited until about the middle to do these so that I would have the fur already in place. On top of the brown, I'm putting pure black, and this gives some dimension to the eye and the nose. Don't worry about mistakes. You can negative space paint with the background color to get rid of those. Now I'm lightly touching some of the texture on the fur to make sure that it's a lost edge and diffused. I do the same thing for the other lamb, starting off with the dark brown and putting a little bit of black on top of it to give it some dimension. Getting all those facial features in so that I have the shape of those eyes, nose, and mouth. Humans relate more to the facial features than we do anything else on the lamb, so I'm taking extra care to make sure that I get those features well. I can negative space paint to shape the eyes, making sure that they follow the sense of proportion and that they're in the correct position on the head. I feel pretty comfortable with these, so I'm moving on, putting a little detail in place. And making sure I don't mess up the pastel underneath by using my ruler as a mall stick. Next, I'm going in with some grasses, and I have already put in some of the light yellow, so you can see the light yellow of the fur. I worked it all around. The grasses will be pretty much the last step, and then you're done. Thank you for joining me.